Leyla, for those that haven't come across you online, introduce yourself and let our listeners know what we're talking about today.
My name is Dr. Leyla Hannbeck, and I'm a pharmacist by profession, and I work as the Chief Executive of the Association of Independent Multiple Pharmacies, which is an organization representing family-owned businesses here in England and Wales. Today, we're going to be talking about the state of community pharmacy in England, and I'm going to be taking you through some of the challenges that we're currently facing in our sector and the way forward in terms of like where community pharmacy is heading in England.
Leyla, I suck at geography, but I know looking at your past, you maybe went to Finland for pharmacy school and something else. Where did you bop around in your history? And what is your hometown where you grew up?
I grew up in Finland. I was part of the Swedish-speaking community in Finland, going to school to Swedish-speaking schools. And so when it was time to go to university, I moved to Sweden, to Uppsala University, to complete my studies in pharmacy. I graduated as a pharmacist and started practicing as a pharmacist before moving to the UK in 2004 and progressing my career here.
What brought you to the UK?
Well, when I was in Sweden, we used to get regularly approached by UK companies who were looking for pharmacists. And I'm married to a German. And so it was kind of, we were thinking at the start of our careers where we should be settling and where we should be taking forward our careers. And so when this opportunity came up in England, then we had a discussion, okay, is it going to be Sweden? Is it going to be Finland? Is it going to be Germany? And then we decided, why not go to England, where we both, nobody has an upper hand and we can start fresh there.
Well, I have a German background, so your husband and I have you outnumbered now 2-1. So it's good you're in a neutral England at this point.
Good. You see, that was one of the reasons, neutrality.
Lil, define to me multiple independent. It almost sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not. It's a pharmacy business that's owned more independently, but they have more than one pharmacy. How do you define that with your terms?
So when we talk about independent multiples, we mean organizations that are owned independently, but the owner has more than one pharmacy. But in our case, our membership allows those who have more than 3 pharmacies, because we believe that when you have more than 2 or 3 pharmacies, then your business setting changes in that you will have a head office function, for example. You will need other pharmacists to pharmacists to work for you.
Yeah.
And so the business model changes, and hence, whilst it's independently owned, when you have multiple branches, you are kind of in that sort of head office category.
We just have one pharmacy. My dad had a number of them, but we just have one now. And I just have one now. And it seems to me that with 2 pharmacies, you can kind of still run it as one. The pharmacist in a emergency can kind of bop back and forth, and you share maybe some employees and things like that. 3, maybe, but 3 to 4, then you really start having a different business model, it seems. And you can have that different business model with 2, but you certainly have to have it as you approach the handful of pharmacies.
Yes, that's right. So whilst these pharmacy groups are kind of multiple, but they always have that sort of independent ethos in them, that sort of family business. And the business model obviously changes as you described, in that you kind of develop, that sort of head office function, in that people will have, for example, similar standard operating procedures. You will write it for your branches, and then you need to have, various staff members in various branches responsible for different tasks. And so things kind of develop in that sense. But one thing that I have noticed is that sort of independent ethos remains within these family businesses, no matter how big they get.
No matter how big they get. Is there a number that just doesn't make sense anymore that's outside of your group? Or in theory, if it's still owned by a family or a person, no matter how many they have, it still has that ethos of being the independent feel?
Yes. So we have, for example, within our membership, pharmacies that the owner, has about over 250 pharmacies.
Whoa,
and
really? Wow.
Yes. And they are part of that independent group. And you asked where we draw the line in that, there's no line as such there. It's how the business identifies themselves. And I think one thing that we go by generally as sort of a rule of thumb is that we also have national multiples, like, for example, Walgreen Boots. And we've got, for example, Lloyd's, or some of the supermarkets that do have pharmacies. And so they are kind of in a different category in that they're kind of more of a corporate operation. And so, while some of them, for example, some of the supermarkets may have lower branch numbers than some of our members, but the distinguishing factor there is that, how they feel they are. So our members are independent, and that's how they identify themselves as.
So when you say we have them, you mean in England there are such groups, and they're not a part of your group because they start to have that corporate feel to them.
Yes. So in England, there are different categories. So we've got the single independents, then we've got the pharmacy groups, and then we've got the national multiples, the corporates as such. So the corporates are represented through a different organization called the Company Chemist Association.
Do you guys have like softball tournaments against them and stuff? Are you friendly with them, or is that just a totally separate
No,
group?
Of course. I mean, it's in the best interest of community pharmacy in general for all of us to work together. So we do have, whilst there are many differences in terms of like a business model, like for example, when you look at Boots, for example, they've got a huge health and beauty part of their operation. When you look at, for example, Asda or Tesco, the supermarkets, they've got obviously that food and grocery element to their operations. So the business models are different. However, we do have quite a lot of commonalities as well. So we try to kind of focus on those commonalities when it comes to our approach to negotiating with the government, discussing with the government, and so on.
What's the worst part of your job? What's the worst part of your week? Like an hour of your week that either gives you the most angst or you just don't look forward to it. What is that?
We do have quite a lot of challenges at the moment within the world of pharmacy in England. And one of the biggest challenges that we've had for a number of years is that lack of recognition. And I think it causes quite a lot of, it makes you feel bad when you are not appreciated as a sector, as a profession. And when you have that feeling, it kind of loads of other bad things, fall out from that in terms of like, you kind of, what we don't want to happen is that it would have some sort of a knock-on effect on people's confidence of people wanting to pick up pharmacy and study pharmacy and being proud of our profession and our sector. And so that recognition is for me something that we need to really work on gaining, not because obviously of the, we've done everything we can. I mean, the sector is in the eyes of the public is very high up, particularly during the pandemic. What we did during the pandemic, what our teams did during the pandemic was absolutely brilliant. And this was kind of pharmacy across the world really stepping up and leaving the doors open and being right at the forefront of everything, of healthcare. But unfortunately, sometimes those decision makers in position of power within government or within the civil service don't necessarily see it that way. And it's fighting for that recognition that gets sometimes very frustrating. And also, we have been for many years suffering from a huge lack of funding. For those who don't know much about the how pharmacy operates in the UK, well, over 90% of our activities are NHS focused and NHS funded. NHS is a national health service, and so we're very much dependent on the fees that we receive from the government for patients to be able to receive medicines free and receive services free. So that kind of that funding not being there for so many years has left a lot of pharmacies struggling with cash flow, with financial issues, and particularly now, Mike, when we're seeing the cost of living rising, and everything is going up apart from the pharmacy funding. So a lot of businesses are finding themselves in a very difficult position at the moment.
The article that you posted that you were quoted in, and it was saying just that costs are going up, especially now they're going up. So something that was fair, even not that it was, but even if it was fair 3 years ago, it's not fair now because everything's going up and pharmacies going down or staying the same.
Yes, exactly. And when I hear you ask me about what is the worst thing in my week, is when I get those phone calls from people saying that, Leyla, did you know I had to remortgage my house in order for keeping my business afloat? That is a very difficult conversation that I'm having with people, and that kind of makes me feel very upset because I know that they've invested everything in those businesses, in their business, and I know that they've done everything they can. And no one should be in a position to kind of remortgage their house to stay afloat.
Yeah.
Because they've got just that much invested in it, their pensions and invested in that pharmacy.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to kind of having these conversations.
It seems the frustrating thing of that for me would be you've got 90% funded by the NHS and they're using pharmacies quite a bit. And especially during COVID, pharmacies have shown their value. If you came to me and said, Joe's shoe repair is going out of business and darn it, he deserves to be in business because of all the good work he does, and it seems like he should be in business. It's like, well, I don't know, kind of supply and demand. It would be nice if Joe could still be in the shoe repair business, but that's just not how things are going these days. The problem with pharmacy is that there is such a need, and you can see the good that's being done. And you know that if those pharmacies weren't there, it's like, who the hell would take care of this person who needs this? They would not be taken care of as well. And that's the frustrating part, to seeing businesses going out of business when you know the need is there, but the politicians seem to be looking the other way.
Yes, that's right. So I always say that there are various different aspects to pharmacy that sometimes people fail to see. One aspect of our profession, obviously apart from the biggest part, which is being healthcare professionals, right, offering accessibility and services to patients, we also are playing a great role within the social care element of things. So a lot of times, for those patients who are lonely and don't have anyone to speak with, pharmacy teams are, the people, that offer a shoulder to cry on, or coming in speaking with their local pharmacist. So that social element is there. Just getting out of the house for a lot of older people to just speak to somebody is that element. And a lot of businesses actually around pharmacies depend on that as well, because on the, in a community or in a high street, when someone gets out to get their community pharmacy, they're likely to pop into another store to get something else, or, so it kind of, the economy around that community or, that the high street kind of depends on that pharmacy as well, in a sense. So we have a much greater role than sometimes those in position power or decision makers actually see us as. And I think that's what happens when those pharmacies in the local areas are no longer there. Then the community gets really badly affected because they have to make longer journeys because they won't have that person to speak with. So it has a lot of these pharmacies are situated in areas of deprivation and in areas of health inequality. So, the impact of these pharmacies not being there is huge on those communities.
Yeah, and it's not just traveling farther for a pharmacy. Once you've gone farther, that connection decreases maybe exponentially. I don't know, but let's just say it does. In other words, if a pharmacist is helping you and they know you're from a town 25 miles away, it's different than them helping you if you live around the corner and maybe the kids went to school together, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's not just distance. It's less and less personal care as the distance increases.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm looking at myself. I mean, as a pharmacy service user, as well as being a pharmacist, but I've got a toddler, a 2-year-old, and sometimes I need to nip into the pharmacy and get some stuff. And sometimes I just need to kind of see things for myself and just, read things and all of that. So, just being able to pop to my local pharmacy and getting something from my kid as a mom is important. And I'm a pharmacist. I know, for example, what things to get for my kid if he's got a fever or, so on. But a lot of people are not within the healthcare profession and, they pop into their pharmacy, like young mothers pop into pharmacy and they want to have that discussion with the pharmacist to see what's best for their kids, what products are best and what to do. And if that pharmacist is not there, so what do you do, particularly now? Because in the UK, in England, it's very difficult to see a GP because of the fact that a lot of GPs are now offering telephone services, rather than popping in. This happened since the pandemic. And also GPs here are also under a lot of pressure. So getting an appointment to see a GP is very difficult. So again, pharmacy finds itself in that position where, you can provide that sort of advice and support to patients who need to see you face to face.
Leyla, because you are a pharmacist by training, how important is that? Let's say that you knew everything that you know, that somehow you got all the knowledge that you needed without being a pharmacist. It probably helps to say, especially when you're talking to the politicians and things like that, you're like, I'm a pharmacist. I just don't like to throw around titles and things, but that's got to be a pretty important title when you're then talking to a politician so they don't try to one-up you. You can say, look, I know I've done this.
Yes, and it's happened several times in terms of like being in a position when you, as a pharmacist, I've been there, I've done that. And so when we're talking, for example, about addict services, like, providing, opiate substitute to addicts, talking from my own experience, for example, how it was and how, how that service was and how important that was, what we were providing, being able to say that I used to provide the service to over 60 addicts. I used to supervise methadone dispensing, oversee that to over 60 addicts regularly. It's something that I can provide details around how they felt, and when we talk about various different things in terms of like supply of medicines and the challenges that you're facing when it comes to, for example, phoning around, ringing around, trying to source the medicine and all of this, how much time that takes, or when you see the baskets piling up in terms of like what you need to be dispensing and all of that, and the services that you provide when you sit in the consultation room with the patient and you're going through the medicines together with them, or you discuss about their blood pressure or their diabetes and all of those things. And it's not just saying that, it's something that I've experienced myself. And I know that with every consultation that I have done, there's always been other things as well in terms of like providing that sort of care to the patient and that listening ear, basically, that they open up to you and all of that. So I kind of, as you said, as a pharmacist, I can bring that to the table a lot of times.
Leyla, explain Brexit to me.
Oh my. We can sit here the whole night talking about Brexit.
We've got time. Explain it to me like somebody who went to a high school that maybe didn't have good government or history classes, and I never really followed very well. And when the front page of the newspaper used to come home, I would just sort of like ignore everything on the front page and go to, entertainment or something like that. Explain it to me. And where I want to go with this is, how does it affect health choices and things like that? So first, tell me what Brexit was.
So the whole Brexit thing started with a referendum in 2016, where people voted to come out of the European Union. And so up until then, obviously, Britain was part of the European Union, and then the whole process started in terms of like coming out. And, that we were, for example, bound by some European laws around various different things. And so that kind of gradually got pushed aside in that, for example, they're now thinking about introducing different laws. There used to be European laws, so to say. You have to bear with me because it's kind of difficult to explain this topic, but
well, you think it's difficult for someone from England to explain it. Think about how hard it is from an old guy from US to understand it.
I don't envy you. It's so basically for pharmacy, it meant that like everyone else, like every other business, in terms of like, we were bound by some laws. For example, Falsified Medicines Directive, which was some sort of was a European law, but then with UK no longer being part of Europe, then our regulator, Medicines Health Regulatory Agency, have to now put a different process in place for that. And there were, for example, laws that affected data protection and so on. And some of those laws stayed because they came before Brexit. But I mean, anything after that, well, obviously, UK will not be affected by that. But so essentially, Brexit impacted on pharmacy like it impacted on a lot of people's lives, in that, whatever happens within our political sphere, political surrounding, in terms of like how the government moves forward with regards to various different policies related to Brexit, it affects us all. So we are not kind of immune as a sector to, what's happening with Brexit. So from our perspective, essentially what we do, as we've always done as a sector, is that we put our head down and we make sure that we put patients at the center of everything that we do, because that is definitely hasn't changed, in that patients will always be remaining our focus.
Was there any European pharmacy laws that when Brexit came, you were no longer under those laws and now you have to write some of your own? Or did the Brexit not have anything to do with pharmacy law?
Well, yes, there was, for example, the rules and regulations around Falsified Medicines Directive. That was going to be a European directive. And then when the UK left, that obviously kind of no longer applied to UK, but we need to kind of have our own way forward with that, because UK cannot be the only country not having anything to do with falsified medicines, because otherwise it can be the dumping ground for falsified medicines. We also have quite a lot of problems, for example, in Northern Ireland, in that, Brexit has caused, for example, medicine supply issues there, which is kind of very complicated and very hard at the moment for pharmacies in the in Northern Ireland.
Because of maybe different transporting laws and things like that, it's just not as free anymore.
Yes. It kind of comes back to that. European free market, and and obviously the deals that they have been negotiating with the EU, and how that affects, for example, the Irish border, between Ireland and Northern Ireland. So I think, so that has had, a lot of, that has impacted on pharmacists there quite a lot, the medicine supply, which is difficult for them. But yeah, generally there was another law that just came out just before Brexit, which was extremely complicated, and that was called GDPR. And GDPR was very much around data protection. And what it really meant for pharmacy was that we had to be careful in terms of like whose data we're sharing and what we're doing with third parties, data sharing with third parties, or, how we kind of put, how data is handled generally in pharmacy. So there was very rigorous laws around that. And GDPR was implemented just before Brexit. So we are kind of bound by those data protection laws that GDPR brought in.
You're familiar with the term HIPAA in the US?
No, what's that?
Similar thing. It's health portability, something or other. Same idea. Okay. It was a bigger law that the part that pharmacies see is, privacy of their data and things like that, which I thought that was overkill for pharmacies because as well as I do, especially with independently owned pharmacies, we've been doing patient privacy or trying to be prudent with the information. We've been doing that for hundreds of years, and this law came in, it kind of preached to the choir. The law came in and it maybe protects some of the goofy things that big corporations were doing as far as marketing and, paying doctors and all that kind of stuff. But pharmacies weren't doing that anyway. And the problem is when you have some of that enforcement, independent pharmacies are an easy target for inspectors and that kind of stuff. The bigger places, they've got legal teams and it's harder to get in on some of that stuff. So that stuff bothers me when these laws come out and then we're the target and we weren't even the offender in the first place.
Yeah, and as you said, independent pharmacies, don't have that sort of legal team behind them and don't have that sort of resource behind them to implement some of these laws. And with the GDPR, obviously, it puts a very hefty figure on if you broke the rules, broke the law, or whatever happened, then you would be paying a hefty sum, which I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was very rigorous, and it was also very difficult to get your head around the rules. I mean, it was kind of a lot of, as it tends to with some of the legal stuff, lots of jargon involved. So kind of deciphering some of that for independence, was not an easy task at all. I remember that I used to go around the country talking about GDPR in terms of like how you need to comply with GDPR, and it was one of the most boring
it's
topics
terrible.
I have ever spoken in my life.
It's terrible. Then you got to do the training every so often.
Yes.
I talked to some of the leaders of the American pharmacy groups, and they said that sometimes they'll meet with other groups across the countries. Do you do any of that in your role? Are you meeting with any other people in your position? Or I know one of your past positions was more just of the pharmacy association in general. Do you meet with any world people or is that not a thing?
Yeah, occasionally we meet with other people from different countries, and it's always very interesting to exchange ideas and see how things are in various other countries. And sometimes pharmacy operates in such a different way that you kind of think, oh, okay, how does that work? In some countries, for example, they haven't got the big corporates that we've got here. So the pharmacy model is completely different in that you've got to be a pharmacist and own a pharmacy. Then you've got to, you cannot have more than one pharmacy, or, if you have more than one pharmacy, then at least you have to be a pharmacist. So and then there are laws in terms of like how they buy and sell medicines, through the wholesale or manufacturing and all of that, which tends to be different in some countries. And so having worked in Sweden as a pharmacist, for example, when I was working, the pharmacies in Sweden belonged to the state. So I think that was one of the only countries in the world where pharmacies belonged to the state. And it was in the early 2000s that they actually opened it up to the private sector. But that was a very different model of operating. So yeah, it's there are loads of various different models out there, but within the UK as well, in terms of like, we've got as an organization, we've got various events that we hold for our members, and they come together from England, from Wales, and sometimes people travel from Scotland or Northern Ireland to come in. And even within the UK countries, you can see a lot of differences in terms of like operation. For example, the pharmacy contract can vary between countries. The pharmacy contract in England, for example, varies to the contract in Scotland, and the Scottish tend to get it better.
They do a better job with the reimbursement, that contract, or?
Well, their contract is more pharmacy friendly compared to, for example, England.
With the NHS?
With the NHS, in that the services that they offer, they're entrusted to deliver services, but they're also compensated for the services adequately. And so pharmacy is a kind of very much part of that valued part of the healthcare sector. But in England, for example, we've had a lot of challenges trying to get to a similar level to Scotland. But then again, you look at, for example, Scotland has a smaller population, England has a bigger population, but that shouldn't really be an issue in terms of like stopping the progress and recognizing our sector going forward.
When you say 90% is from the NHS, what's the other 10%? Is that just elective walk-in stuff, not through physicians and things? Is that what that is?
So yeah, over 90%, definitely is NHS. And then obviously we've got the over-the-counter medicines that pharmacies do, and then you've got some provide private services that offer private services that could be bringing private income. But yeah, very much over 90% is NHS dependent.
In the US, our nemesis is the pharmacy benefit manager, because they basically charge the corporations a lot of money, pay us a little bit of that money, and they keep this spread. And nobody likes them. At least nobody likes the opaque ones, because you can't see what the hell they're doing. It's all secret. It's all smoke and mirrors. In England, when you've got the NHS as 90% of the revenue and you've got the pharmacies, do you have such a middleman? And what is your view of them?
Oh, so yes. So basically the way it works here is that we've got a contract that it's kind of, the supply part of it, and then we've got the service part of it. So the supply part of it sits with an organization called the Department of Health and Social Care. So the department works for the government in terms of like compensating for the cost of medicines, and they very much work, for example, in relation to things that have to do with the supply of medicines. But then we've got the NHS England, which is an organization that works, for the NHS, looking after affairs basically in England, and they are mainly in charge of the services and the direction of travel in terms of like setting the strategy for how, for example, healthcare service and pharmacy looks like going forward. And that, for example, if you are offering a service, it's, for example, like a hypertension service or like a diabetes service, very much likely that it's commissioned via NHS England. So they're kind of two different organizations that we are having negotiations with, but also the people with the money are the Treasury. So the Treasury are in charge of the funding and where it goes.
Who do pharmacists hate? We hate the opaque PBMs. Some people hate the corporations that have unrealistic job requirements for the pharmacists, unrealistic metrics and so on. I'm trying to think who else we hate. That's probably the main ones.
You're right. Okay.
Maybe the insurances who haven't aren't paying for pharmacy services and so on. But this isn't coming from you because you maybe have to be a little bit more politically correct, maybe. But if I come up to the average pharmacist and I say, who do you hate in England that is above you in pharmacy? Who is that? Who are they going to name?
I think if you would ask pharmacists, sometimes they would say to you that they feel let down and they feel, that, for example, NHS England could do a better job at promoting pharmacy and having that better recognition of the sector. So I think I don't know to use the word hate, but I think people are disappointed in terms of like the past years in particular, how things have gone in terms of like, pharmacy has had such a horrible situation in that, the funding squeeze and everything, they have to do more for less and so on. And it's not recognized. And after the pandemic, there were all these nice words in terms of like, yes, pharmacy did this, pharmacy did that, perfect. But people are not seeing that tangible action. Words are lovely. I mean, hearing how lovely pharmacy teams have worked, how much they have put effort in, and so on. But if you really want to recognize someone, you don't just say words. You actually show it in your action.
Who hires you? Who do you answer to? And I know ultimately you can say I answer to the pharmacist because that's where my heart is and all that stuff. But who do you actually answer to?
I'm not going to say all that fluffy stuff, Mike.
No fluffy stuff.
Well, we have a board, and my board consists of pharmacy owners, pharmacy contractors, our members. So I respond to them. But I also respond to not just those members that I represent, but also many times independents as a whole, independent pharmacies as a whole.
Sure.
But I answer to my board.
How many are on the board?
We've got 10 at the moment on the board, 10 pharmacy owners.
It's nice to know that the board members that are hiring you are in the battle and they know what's going on. They don't have unrealistic expectations, I would say. Would you say that?
I'm actually quite lucky to be working with a board that is very knowledgeable, and they actually help me quite a lot in terms of like bringing things to me that they are facing. So everything that we do is not really from ivory tower, so to say, thing that's saying, oh, this is what we want, blah, blah. It's all based on reality and what can be achieved and what needs doing. So, and everything that we do in terms of like the messaging that we put out there, the work that we do with the media, and we are kind of very active in the sphere of national media as an organization, because we want to bring what pharmacists is doing to the public and making politicians see for themselves what is going on. So, everything that we do is not really sitting in an ivory tower, saying, oh, well, this is how it should be. We actually are doing it. We know what the realities are and what we're capable of, and what the challenges are and how we need to tackle those challenges. We offer solutions. It's not that we just, as a sector, we just say, we complain and moan and nag.
You're not just their psychologist.
Exactly. No, we offer quite a lot of, many times we offer solutions in terms of like what we can do, backed up by evidence. But it's just getting through. It's that bit that is very, very difficult. And then I get to hear, well, everybody's in the same boat. All businesses are suffering. Well, I completely sympathize with all businesses, and I sympathize with everyone. From pharmacy perspective, we've seen during the pandemic that this sector is needed. It needed. Pharmacies are not like any commodity. They are medicines that without it, patients cannot function.
And the squeaky wheel gets the grease. There might be other companies involved too, but you got to speak up then. Everybody's got a voice.
Exactly. And pharmacy, again, we bring a lot of other businesses together. As I said, when you go to see your pharmacist, you're likely to pop into somewhere else. And in short, it's frustrating, Mike.
Leyla, explain the average board member to me. Are they guys? Are they ladies? What would be the average person on that 10-person board? And how many pharmacies would they say they own on average?
Oh, I haven't counted how many pharmacies I actually own. I think it's near 500 or maybe more, 600.
Between the 10 of them?
Between the 10 of them, yes. And there are men.
Men.
You tend to see that here in the UK, the vast, vast majority of pharmacy owners are men. And so that kind of transpires onto the boards. In most organizations, you'll find that the main consistent of the board is male.
What's the average age, would you say?
The age is different. So we've got, some that are, young in their very early 40s or late 30s. And then you've got some that are kind of in their 60s. So kind of is a balance when it comes to the age.
Do you notice a difference between a younger, I'm just going to say guy because that's who you're dealing with mainly. Do you notice a difference between the younger guys and the older guys? Are the older guys either more jaded or are they more patient or whatever? Do you see a difference in personalities between a 40-year-old and a 60-year-old when it comes to pharmacy and their communication with you and so on?
I think it tends to be that everyone, again, the good thing with my board is that everyone brings something to the table. So the young guys, for example, they can bring things that, they've, from technology, for example, perspective, they are this generation that they can, they're very good at online and things like that. And then you've got the older ones that have been in the business for a longer time and they kind of have seen it all. So
which ones are grumpier? Are the younger ones grumpier or the older ones?
I think age has nothing to do with it at all.
Come on.
No, I really mean it.
They don't call people grumpy old men for nothing. But you're saying age doesn't have to do with it.
I don't think so. It's to do with personality. So it's to do with, what you're passionate about and what you care about and so on. I don't think we can categorize, at least not my board, in terms of like, if you're older, you're more grumpy or not. I think it's more to do with what is more important to them. Sometimes a particular topic could be of importance to someone that they get passionate about. That may not be as important for somebody else.
It's hard to tell passion, I suppose, because when you look at somebody, you don't know if their passion's growing or if they were passionate and now they've kind of given up, or maybe they haven't given up, but they've accepted some things. It's hard to tell where somebody is. And I guess everybody's on their own trajectory.
Yeah, I think it's been very difficult. The past few years have been very difficult in that, obviously, I think people's energy has been sucked out because of the pandemic and what we have done, and also the workforce challenges that we're currently facing and the underfunding and all of that. So I think, but people people are passionate about, what they do, about their business, about what they've built up over the years, and they just don't want it to go under, and they continue being passionate about that. But I think there is a feeling of kind of that sadness people feel that, over these past few years, we've done everything we possibly can as a sector. Everything we've asked, we've done it. But,
when we started off, you mentioned that respect wasn't there. Would you say that the respect has gone down, or maybe it stayed the same, but it hasn't responded to pharmacy's response to COVID?
We definitely have a very huge respect for the public, very. And we do have respect with the politicians, and we do have respect with those higher up, in the decision-making process. But it just, and they know that pharmacy can do it, and they want to, for pharmacy to do more. But it's one thing saying that in terms of like that we want pharmacy to do this and that, and another thing to actually allowing pharmacy to do that by, for example, remunerating it properly, by, for example, being honest about the fact that there are these challenges that they need to be supported with. So that's why we say it becomes about words rather than really tangible actions for this sector.
Leyla, a lot of times when things don't go the way we want them to go, we like to think of an enemy, somebody who is not letting us get there. And a lot of times the enemy is the person that's making the most money from something. They just look like a greedy enemy. When people think of the NHS not responding well to pharmacy, is there somebody getting rich off of this? Or would they say, well, nobody's getting rich. It's just that the taxes aren't there to fund this?
Our funding is very much sitting, the majority of it sitting with the Treasury. So it's the Treasury that releases the money to NHS. It's the Treasury that releases the money to the department. And so it's very much depending on the way the Treasury is going.
Is the Treasury the same as the government, or do you
Yes.
think of that as being different?
No, it's the same as the government. So
Yeah.
the government, holds the Treasury. So they essentially control in terms of where the funding is going. And what we hear a lot of times is that, well, everybody wants a piece of the funding. So, dentists say we want it, doctors say we want it, pharmacists say we want it. And, not to mention all the other businesses that kind of say that they're suffering and they want to, for example, the hospitality sector may say, we want some money, and other sectors may say they want it, and they keep saying that there is simply not enough money in the pot to be able to give to everybody. So what we then need to do, what we're trying to do, is that offering them the sort of solutions in that, look, if you give pharmacy the money, this will happen. And
we can save money.
If you, which a lot of times makes sense because, they make sense really. Not just a lot of times, they do make sense. In that if the government are having targets, for example, for patients not to end up in accident and emergency, or end up in hospitals which would cost the NHS more money, or would go to a doctor to get a service which you could get cheaper in a pharmacy, in terms of like, leaving the doctors get on with other things. Well, obviously that is a no-brainer in terms of like, the value that we offer the NHS. So if you allow us to do it, if you fund it properly, you will see how much benefits you are going to get out of this. I mean, we've demonstrated that, for example, delivering COVID vaccination or flu vaccination through community pharmacy can be such a good thing, or and getting for example, participating in the prevention agenda before people to get to that stage where they need hospital appointments, or seeing, going to accident and emergency. So the evidence is there. And so it's just kind of for them to make that decision to actually support this to the best benefit of the NHS and also the patients.
It seems like that's a huge benefit. And it doesn't seem, because I know in the US there's all studies like that too. you prevented someone from going to the ER and that kind of thing. It seems like the numbers are there, but it doesn't seem like people are responding to those. And I don't know, maybe it's short-sighted. Maybe if they see a saving somewhere, they don't want to look at the potential, what could have been worse. Maybe they're just jumping on something quickly. I don't know. I don't know why they don't respond to those kind of numbers.
Yeah, well, this is something that we don't understand either, in terms of like, when you got this in front of you, this resource in front of you in the form of community pharmacy, where there is so much that they can do and have shown that they can do. Yet you kind of, and it's the accessibility as well, just being able to walk through your community pharmacy and get, your job done. It's very valuable. But unfortunately, I think it's one of those things that, no matter how hard you're working at it, I think, yeah, we are in the same boat. I mean, if you speak to a doctor, they will say the same thing. They will say, oh, we are starved of funding. If you speak to a dentist, they will say to you, oh, most dentists are now providing private services because they don't want to deal with the NHS anymore, because they're not getting funded. And people cannot always pay for the private dentist appointments. So everyone will say that, but in the case of pharmacy, we obviously have that evidence to back it up as well.
One of the biggest problems in the US is the smoke and mirrors, how there's a lot of different definitions of cost, and then there's rebates, and then there's, wholesale and acquisition and all this stuff. And it's all thrown into this mix, and the manufacturers, especially the pharmacy benefit managers, do a good job of throwing these terms around to confuse even the politicians. And then they get confused, and then they don't even know exactly what they're voting on because whom do they trust and things like that. When some of these rules get put in place as far as pharmacy reimbursement and so on, I don't hold my breath in thinking that the change is going to come soon, but at least some of that makes things a little bit more transparent so that the politicians can understand it more. In England, do you have all that confusion, all those levels? It seems like maybe it's not quite as confusing because you don't have as many players in it.
So we've got the politicians, and then we've got the civil servants. So, we mainly negotiate with the civil servants, who then, then discuss with the politicians. So our main, the main conversations that we have are with the civil servants.
Is there someone in there trying to confuse things at all? Is there a weasel in there that's trying to confuse stuff, or is it pretty straightforward?
Well, we've actually, everything is kind of new now. So we've got a set of new civil servants now in post. So, for example, our chief pharmaceutical officer is a new person now.
Because of Brexit?
No, it just happened, really. The other one retired, and we have now a new chief pharmaceutical officer. And then, the people that we're talking with at the Department of Health are new. And you can see they do have, many of them do have a positive kind of way of looking at community pharmacy.
They're kind of placating you. They don't come up with anything.
Well, they hear from us what the case is in terms of like the data that we have to offer, and then they take it to the decision makers in terms of like within the government, and so it's kind of complicated. It's very complicated in that we've got so many various different layers that we need to go through. But we do obviously talk directly to the politicians as well. We do go to the Parliament and hold events at the Parliament and talk to the politicians. We talk to the ministers and the Secretary of States, and in terms of like trying to push our case forward. But there are these barriers there in terms of like at the highest levels of perhaps civil service that we still haven't been able to get through, perhaps, and convince and try. Well, we know what we are about. and the evidence speaks for itself. It's just the culture of leadership that needs changing. I think within those organizations.
And I think that with any change, you got to keep pushing. You don't know who's going to break through. You don't know what's going to break through,
Exactly.
but you can't choose it ahead of time. You have to hit it on all levels, and then all changes that way. Someone gets a hold of something.
Exactly. And that's what keeps me going, Mike, in terms of like, sometimes when you hit a brick wall and you think to yourself, oh gosh, now we're here again. You can't, I say to myself, I'll keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing, and be patient, keep pushing, and find a new way of doing it, and, one day it'll get through.
Leyla, if I had to pick one person to blame, I don't know England that well, but if I had to pick one person to blame in all this, I'm going to say Prince Harry.
Oh, excuse me. He's your, he's in America now, so you should be his supporter.
All right, my favorite news that I read, I'm on it for way too long every day, even though they got too many damn ads, is Mail Online. Now that's an England one, right? The Daily Mail, but it's called Mail
Daily
Online,
Mail.
right?
Yes.
So that's my favorite news. And not because I'm like hoity-toity, like I like, British news and stuff. It's just, it's good. It's like a combination of like, you don't know these, but like People Magazine / USA Today. It's news, but it adds human interest stories and so on. But once in a while, when something happens with Prince Harry, is it still okay to call him Prince, or did he get that removed?
No, it's called Prince Harry, yeah.
All right.
Prince Harry.
Once in a while, they have Prince Harry, or sometimes they'll have Prince Harry and what's her name? Meghan?
Meghan, yeah.
Meghan.
Meghan Markle.
And they'll have like 20 stories of them in a row. And I'm like, too much.
I can see that they don't like them.
The general public, how's Prince Harry? Is he a traitor? Is he okay? What's the word on the street in England?
You're asking my opinion or generally what the word is on the street?
What's your opinion?
To be honest, I don't follow.
That's what I'm saying.
I do read Daily Mail. I do. I think it's the most read paper or online in the UK actually. So it's got a huge readership. I do read. Obviously I want to keep in the loop in terms of like what's happening and what people write, because you can see the commentaries of what people write. So it's important. But when it comes to those stories, to be honest, I just skip through them. I don't read them.
The comments on Mail Online, and I don't do this too often, but I actually have a handle. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I've got a name, and I'll go on there and comment once in a while.
Oh, you do?
But I'm not going to tell you who I am on there.
Oh my God. So we know all these nasty ones coming from you then?
Well, yes. You got this queen over there. Long time she's been, I think 70 years now?
Yeah. Well, no. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, 70 years. Yeah, 70 years Jubilee.
They don't do anything, right? They just look fancy. They just represent England.
But their role is kind of not be involved in any politics, really, and just kind of represent as such. But I'm not the best person to ask about this because I don't follow stories about royals and all of that. Because I having grown up in Finland, it's just we haven't been much into royalty. When I look at my kids, for example, in school, they taught about it right from a young age in terms of like about the Queen and about how to write to the Queen and stuff like that. So it is embedded in them as they grow up. But this wasn't the case with me in terms of when I was growing up. This wasn't really something that I had followed, and so as such, I don't really pay that much attention.
You know the Kardashians?
I think everyone in the world knows about the Kardashians.
Following the royals is kind of like following the Kardashians, right? It's kind of like a gossipy thing.
definitely, it's one thing that, the media have something to write about as well,
Yeah.
Occasionally when they run out of stories, they can put some papers, write something about, the royal family or so on. But as I said, when I go to Daily Mail, I mean, right now in the UK, so much is happening in terms of with the cost of living, energy prices, war in Ukraine. Then you've got, everything else that is going on that there's loads of stories to read. So I kind of flip through the other.
You know what else is too much besides the Queen is soccer. We just don't care. English football. We just don't care about that over here.
Oh no, it's lovely. Football is in the DNA of.
We don't care about that over here.
But equally, I don't understand. I mean, again, from in the UK, people like rugby. I don't understand that game, but it's a big deal in America, isn't it? Rugby or American
Well, no,
football?
rugby's not that huge. I think it's maybe Australia. Is that rugby? Do they do a lot of rugby?
They do
there
rugby.
or
New
something?
Zealand does. Yeah. You do baseball, don't you? Baseball and basketball
We
are
do
huge.
baseball. Baseball, that's the American pastime. Baseball and apple pie. When you think about the American way, it's baseball.
Yeah. Is it more popular than basketball? Which one would you say is basketball?
It's about the same. Probably basketball, baseball, and football are about the same. And then there's, other stuff. People are going to argue me, but there's NASCAR and hockey and all that. But the big three are probably baseball, football, and basketball.
Yeah.
We share more in common with you guys as independent pharmacy owners than we differ. Much more in common. What words would you give to pharmacists? And I know this is a time of frustration and a time of sadness. What would you leave pharmacists with at this point?
I think as pharmacists, we should really be proud of our sector and our profession. I think one thing that we have seen over the past few years is how important of a role our profession has within the society. We are part of the fabric of people's lives and society. And so we should really be proud of that. And when we don't get the recognition, which is very hard sometimes, because obviously we work really, really hard and we are right at the forefront of the healthcare, we shouldn't let it get us down. And we should come back up and be proud. And a lot of times, it's those patients and that value us that we should think about in terms of what they say to us should really matter a lot. And so, and we know that they do value us. We know that the work that we do for them is very important. I just need to hammer that home to those in position of power and the decision makers to make sure that they see things the way the constituents and the public see it. So that's the challenge that I have, for example, with my role.
Boy, Leyla, it's a pleasure reaching out to you across the pond, as they say. And as we talked, we don't know when the voice of pharmacy, it has broken through, but it continues to break through, and we don't know where that is. So I appreciate you coming on and talking about this, and keep doing what you're doing.
It's been a pleasure, Mike. Thank you for inviting me to this. It's been lovely chatting to you about pharmacy in the UK.
Thanks, Leyla. We'll be in touch.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye-bye.
Bye.